Let's talk about The View for a moment here. This is Whoopi Goldberg explaining her view of what was behind the Holocaust in World War II. Listen to this. Play it.
Well, also, if you're going to do this, then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race. No, it's not about race.
No, it's about
a different race. But it's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's about.
But it's about white supremacy.
It's not about
ideal race.
But these are two white groups of people.
Well, that was after black people
see them as white.
But you're missing the point. You're missing the point. The minute you turn it into race, it goes down this alley. Let's talk about it for what it is. It's how people treat each other.
Okay. No. This is enough. First of all, to say that the Nazi genocide of Jews and the Nazi genocide generally, 6 million Jews, 11 million people. If you go to the Holocaust Museum in D.C., which I've been to a couple of times, this is all laid out for everyone there. It was so explicitly about race and about demonizing Jews as a race, as well as other people, that there was tremendous amounts of Nazi propaganda devoted specifically to that, Clay, as we all know. In fact, they also went after what are now known as Roma, which were known as gypsies at the time. They don't like that term, but people often still think of it as gypsies. Almost 90% of European Roma, again, a distinct race, were exterminated in the death camps. Jews were clearly exterminated to the tune of over 6 million of them, unbelievably, horrifically murdered in the death camps. 11 million people total. It's like, does Whoopi Goldberg know anything? Why is she even talking about this?
I don't even know what her point was. Right? I mean, The View oftentimes has stupid opinions. The difference, Buck, between what The View would argue and what we would argue is when they have stupid opinions, we play their clip and we ridicule the stupidity of their opinions. But we don't say Whoopi Goldberg and Joy Behar should not be able to be on television, right?
Exactly.
We don't say they shouldn't be able to be on a broadcast or a podcast or anything else.
We certainly don't call for the White House, Clay, to speak from the White House podium and say that, are there an ABC? Is that right? I don't even know.
I think it's a syndicated program that's on. That's a great question. I'm not even sure who produces it.
But you and I certainly would never say, let's have the White House, because they're spreading misinformation. And I mean, to say the Holocaust is not about race and to undermine and to whitewash the evil of it in doing so, to say that, to say something like that, we would never still go and say that the White House should declare that their corporate or parent company should take them off, should kick them off and not allow them to speak. No, we'll say, look, she didn't mean to, I understand this. I'm not going to do what the left does. She wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I know that. I actually know people that say Whoopi Goldberg is a very nice person. I'll speak honestly about it. They say she's a very nice lady in person, but she's really wrong. But we should have the debate. We should have the discussion about wrongness and clarify this for people and not say you should never be allowed to speak in public again.
The cure for falsehood is accuracy. The cure for speech you disagree with, to me, has always been more speech. I mean, and this was traditionally a very, and I hate getting involved in, the spectrum of political beliefs, but the idea of a marketplace of ideas is a traditionally very liberal idea. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, oh, we have to, have 70% tax rates and we have to have socialism, things like that. I just mean the idea of the full flourishment of debate was something that was so widely accepted, Buck. And this is what scares me about our society today, is we have moved from, I disagree with you, and I am going to make an argument against the one that you just made, to I disagree with you, and you do not have the right to have that opinion, and you are racist, you are sexist, you are homophobic, you are transphobic, you're a Nazi. We immediately attack the speaker, right? So again, it might sound like a subtle nuance in the difference between debating ideas and attacking people, but we have pivoted to such an extent. And what scares me, Buck, is The people who are most in favor of regulating speech are young people. On college campuses, there are substantial majorities of kids right now that believe if someone says something that hurts your feelings, they shouldn't be able to say that.
Well, and the same people that claim that they have a stranglehold, if you will, on truth, and this all comes from the left. I mean, it is true these days. If you are a person who believes in liberty, even at the expense of what you want to be an outcome, you're on the right. You cannot be a person on the left these days and say that and you see this with who's being driven, in essence, in terms of their audience. You've got people like Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald that I used to debate jihadism and terrorism back in the day at MSNBC, a man firmly on the left, but principled in why he believes what he believes, which now makes him oftentimes on the right on issues.
Whoopi Goldberg yesterday, we talked about this. I don't know if she missed basically all of the stories surrounding World War II and the Holocaust and exactly what the Nazis were trying to do. But she made an incredibly stupid comment on The View yesterday about how there was no racial element to the Nazis. And then as that story blew up and as Whoopi Goldberg was being attacked, and by the way, I want to reinforce, neither Buck nor I believe that Whoopi Goldberg should be fired, unlike people on the far left wing who every time somebody utters a phrase that they don't like or even says something dumb, I don't believe your entire career should disappear over something that you say, whether you're a left-winger, right-winger, middle of the road, whether you have zero interest in politics at all. But Whoopi Goldberg fell on the sword. She went on, I believe, Stephen Colbert last night and begged for forgiveness, says she'll never bring it up again. And let's listen to Whoopi's apology.
This is what's interesting to me, because the Nazis lied. It wasn't. They had issues with ethnicity, not with race, because most of the Nazis were white people, and most of the people they were attacking were white people. So to me, I'm thinking, how can you say it's about race if you are fighting each other? So it all really began because I said, how will we explain to children what happened in Nazi Germany? I said, this wasn't racial. This was about white on white. And everybody said, no, it was racial. And so that's what this all came from. So once again, don't write me anymore. I know how you feel. Okay, I already know. I get it. And I'm going to take your word for it and never bring it up again.
I mean, it sounds almost like she thinks
Still doesn't
that there's
believe
some ground to stand on, that what she said wasn't entirely ignorant and inaccurate, even though she's apologizing, which I just want to, she did walk back at the end, but she kind of took a couple steps forward, if you know what I mean. There was a little bit of like, well, this is what, no. When the Nazis were referring to themselves as the master race, they were distinguishing in their minds. I mean, their evil ideology was rooted in a sense of their racial superiority. And that then, of course, led to the death camps, the extermination of Jews. As I mentioned yesterday, the extermination of European Roma to the tune of almost 1 million, over 90% of them killed, 6 million Jews, 11 million people, 1.4 million, I believe, Polish Catholics. Now, that's not, an issue of race. That's an issue of, just Nazis being a genocidal lunatic.
There would have been a lot of people of all different races that would have gotten exterminated if the Nazis had been able to continue their march across the world.
Viciously soaked in racism against all people of dark skin all over the world. I mean, the Nazis were evil. About
when you
that
refer to yourself, Buck, as the master race, it kind of makes it about race. I don't know how Whoopi Goldberg could miss that.
And there was also there was a teaching moment here, I think, in a sense, too, because the Nazis were initially they went after people with, and when I say went after, I mean put in camps and then exterminated people with physical disabilities.
Yep.
Went after political opponents. Went after what we would today refer to as members of the LGBTQ community. The Nazis had a whole range of people, but within that they were trying to exterminate. Within that was certainly at the very top was the Jewish people and the racism therein. So it's just. I mean, is Whoopi Goldberg, she's kind of apologizing, but also doing this like, but I know I'm going to I know I'm going to be fine in terms of my career. So, if she were a conservative, folks, oh my gosh, It would be a whole different world. We all know that. But also a conservative wouldn't say this. This is all about the left-right paradigm of how they view race, too, Clay.
Yeah, that's 100% what I was going to say. Everything in left-wing circles is about white versus black racism. And if you can't understand that within the context of racism, everything else doesn't matter. And that's really what she was saying. Whoopi Goldberg, 2-week suspension, Buck Sexton, at The View. There now are reports that Whoopi is furious that she has been suspended for 2 weeks. And I'm sort of torn on this, Buck. Because on the one hand, I abhor cancel culture more than anything other than identity politics. I think those are the twin pillars of the Democratic Party right now. And so whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, I hate to see somebody lose their job for something that they say, even if it's stupid, like what Whoopi Goldberg said, because it just further reinforces the precedent of cancel culture. On the other side, Buck, I understand the argument from people out there who say, hey, if they're going to insist on cancel culture rules, then we have to apply them as steadfastly as possible to left-wingers as they try to do to right-wingers, whether it's Gina Carano getting fired by Disney for The Mandalorian or Roseanne Barr getting fired by Disney as well. Both of those women were fired, and now Whoopi Goldberg gets 2 weeks. Where do you kind of come down on the larger cancel culture battle yourself?
You know, I think it's a great question because I go back and forth. I mean, you're essentially, and a lot of people I know on the right, because we want essentially mutually assured destruction that then transitions into a society that allows for grace, forgiveness, and some sense of just decency toward each other. But where do you draw that line? And so I don't think there's a simple answer, right? I don't think that there's a straightforward, because the left will let the left get away with so much more. And by the way, Whoopi Goldberg, if she were, first of all, I mean, to say that if she were a conservative, she wouldn't be where she is in so many ways. She'd be fired. She wouldn't be suspended.
If one of us had made first of all, we're not as dumb as Whoopi Goldberg, at least not on that issue. If one of us had made the exact same argument that Whoopi Goldberg made, Whoopi Goldberg would demand that we be fired. If
Absolutely.
Joe Rogan had said it, if Tucker Carlson had said it, if Sean Hannity had said it, all of them on The View would have their long knives out, and they would demand that we be fired.
Right. I want to play rough with the commies, but I don't want us to become the commies, if you know what I mean. I think
that's
that they should suffer consequences, but I also don't want us to turn into the ideological infants that the left represent these days in so many ways. So here's my sense of the Whoopi thing. Oh, you know what we always say about facts, by the way? Because I said a bunch of numbers we're discussing. We did our actual history when we talked about this as soon as it broke. All my numbers were correct. Over 6 million Jews, over 11 million killed, about 800,000 or 900,000, they don't know, European, formerly known as Gypsy, now known as Roma. I said 1.5 million Polish Catholics killed in the death camps. I believe it's actually closer to 3 million. So just, again, if I ever get any number wrong, I want to update it right away because I went back to check that because I don't know all the numbers offhand, and I was doing that from the top of my head. But Clay, to me, there's two issues here. There's Whoopi Goldberg, the person saying these things, and then there's the ideology that led her to say these things at some level. And what I mean by that is, sounded like Clay there for a second.
Yeah,
what I mean to say that's a Clayism. Is, you know, she just doesn't, I think at some level, she just doesn't know the history of the Second World War at all, really. I mean, you know, the very, very, very baseline truth of it. So it's a mostly, if we're breaking this down, I think it's mostly ignorance on her part of the history. And so, you know, when people just don't know, I'm more likely to say, all right, I mean, they didn't, remember I said at the time, I don't think that she meant to be, I truly believe this still, she didn't mean to be disrespectful. She's not going on The View and saying, I'm going to antagonize the Jewish people, not just in America, but around the world and make them think that, like, I have maybe some kind of an anti-Semitic. I don't think that was her intent at all. But why would she say something so wrong? And it is because, and we touched on this as well, the American left has created a paradigm where the only racism in their minds is white against non-white and primarily and overwhelmingly white against black racism. There is no other historical framework for analysis of racism between different races, by the way, that don't involve, you know, European whites at all. There's no analysis of racism that involves the Jews as a race that have been discriminated against, not just still to this day, and of course then the genocide of the Holocaust, but going back to the time of Pharaoh and Egypt and the Bible, and I mean, this
kind of
has
a
been around
big
for very
deal
long.
that the Jews have not been treated well if you've done any sort of historical research.
But the left has this campaign of everything gets fit into this. There's no easy overall descriptor for it, but it's almost like the way that the 1619 Project defines all of American history. White on black racism is the only race issue that comes to mind for a Democrat leftist in good standing today. And I think that is part of what pushed Whoopi Goldberg to say something that would obviously be, because I really do. And we're being, I said I know people who are friends with her. I will say that. They say she's a nice person, personally. And I will give her credit for that. And I don't think she meant to be disrespectful. I just don't think she knows any better. And I think the left is brainwashed on this issue. Do you know what I mean? That's how and what she said is really bad as a result of those two things.
Yeah, to a large extent, it is a form of historical illiteracy that has allowed to flourish in the United States. And one of those ideas is, for instance, that the United States was the only place that ever had slavery, right? To your point on the 1619 Project, slavery existed all over the world for tens of thousands of years. Virtually every person at some point in their lineage, whether you're white, black, Asian, or Hispanic, had slaves in your background, right? Because slavery, whether it's in Rome, whether it's in Greece, whether it was all over Africa, all over Asia, if you beat another tribe of people, you very often took the men as slaves and you took the women as either wives or slaves as well. That is a historical reality from all over the world, right? And so I believe what has happened with the Democratic Party, as they have embraced both cancel culture and identity politics, is they have allowed America to be defined exclusively based on race. And that is based on slavery and racism, which is almost exclusively, Buck, being seen as white to black, right? There's no racism of black to Hispanic or Hispanic to Asian. Even though my argument, and I think this would be a revolutionary argument if a political party would adopt it, is that racism exists in all races. And by the way, it exists inside of racial groups. Consider the way that, for instance, Hispanic, which is a broad categorization, how different groups of Hispanics see each other, how different groups of Asian and black people and white people initially. I mean, look at the big battles that were fought in the United States, Buck, over immigration when it was Italians and Germans and people who didn't speak English coming into this country.
My ancestors came into Brooklyn from Ireland during the potato famine, and there were Irish need not apply signs in stores, because the Irish were considered a criminal underclass, and they were the less thans of Europe. I mean, by the way, all the Italian Americans listening right now are like, oh, well, you think you had it bad. And by the way, all the Jewish Americans listening now are saying you think you had it. I mean,
Polish.
This is the reality.
I mean, all of these different European ethnic groups were discriminated against if they didn't speak English or if they came from particular caste systems, if you want to describe it as that way. So this has been the story of American life. And what typically happens, and this is why the melting pot idea used to be a liberal idea, right, was we bring everybody to America. We're one big melting pot. We all ending up with the same values of lionizing American multiculturalism, and everybody can have success regardless of what your background is. Now, what the Democrats argue is America is fundamentally broken, and no one who is a minority can have success here because of the systemic racism and white supremacy which underlies everything. That's the argument they make. And it's one that I reject wholeheartedly. And ironically enough, it's one that even Barack Obama rejected wholeheartedly. If you go back and read his 2008 presidential campaign, it wasn't about cancel culture and it wasn't about identity politics at all.